Welcome to our discussion today. We'll be talking about two videos. One is entitled Gimp Boot Camp, and one is The Elephant in the Room, and they're both from Crip Productions. And with me today, I have Dr. Melisa Brittain, who is a settler, scholar, and filmmaker who currently lives, teaches, and creates collaborative video art on Treaty 6 territory. In 2008, they co-founded Crip Productions, the activist video collective that produced the videos that we're going to be talking about today. Maybe you can start us off by talking a little bit about the why you would choose film to get these ideas across.
I had taken a very short course with FAVA, which is a film and video collective in Edmonton, and on making documentary film. And so my partner and I at the time decided that we would make Gimp Boot Camp based on her experiences as a part-time wheelchair user who was constantly getting intrusive comments and actions from people on the street and assumptions about what she could do and what she couldn't do. And we decided to make it a satire as a way to really show people and have them question their own assumptions about what bodies can do and what is normative, what's different. And we really wanted to challenge people, and we wanted to do it in a way that would make people think and would also make them laugh.
Yeah, because when you can laugh, it's kind of disarming, you know, it sort of gets the body involved in the critique where you're like, it really sort of, is more effective in some ways, I think, than maybe just reading ideas.
Absolutely. I think, some people don't find the film funny. I remember talking to my mom and she really didn't like us using the word GIMP, but that was a word that people in the community were using for themselves. So people who are perceived to have disabilities were using that word for themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So that was a way of reclaiming that word.
Right. And that happens a lot, right? When we take something that's leveraged as an insult, which is really a tool of normalization. So who fits, who doesn't fit, that language use, and reversing it, reclaiming it. Like, for example, in the title of your production group, you have the term Crip, which is also one of these terms that is reclaimed and used sort of as a way of pushing back.
Right, and we use that as an acronym for to sort of make fun of the way that able-bodied people sometimes characterize disabled people as inspirational. There's a scholar named Eli Clare who does some great work on being considered an inspiration just for being alive, and just, yeah, it's wonderful work.
Why don't we start talking about Gimp Boot Camp then? We can start with that video. We were going to show this initial scene where Danielle Pierce, who's featured in the film, receives a Crip award.
I'm Trixie Kane, President of Citizens Recognizing Inspirational People, Crip. Today, we are here to present the Crip of the Year Award. Our 2008 Crip of the Year has accomplished many things. She's won a Paralympic bronze medal, a world championship, 4 national championships, and was named the 2006 World's Most Valuable Player. The 2008 Crip of the Year has bravely overcome many obstacles. She struggles with muscular dystrophy, a progressive disease that silently sneaks around her body, attacking her muscles and weakening them. What makes her so inspirational is that Danielle reminds us all how horrible it would be to be confined to a wheelchair like she is. And so now, without further ado, I present the 2008 Crip of the Year Award to Danielle Pierce. Danielle, you're such an inspiration to all of us. Unfortunately, because Danielle is confined to a wheelchair, she will not be able to join us on stage. What is happening here? You can't be standing here. You can't be. This is not your award. This is not your award. You're supposed to be disabled.
And that was the last time I made that embarrassing mistake.
One thing I thought we might talk about is the way that the disability is framed as an obstacle, or as how horrible it would be to be confined to a wheelchair.
And those are all things that Danielle would hear all the time, this idea of being confined to a wheelchair. So you can see how the award itself, the Crip award giver, Trixie Kane, is basically pity and inspiration go together, right? So she has to pity Danielle for her to think it's worthy of getting the award, and the pity is that she can't get out of her wheelchair, right? But as soon as that stereotype or that normative idea of what disability is disrupted, Trixie loses it and thinks that Danielle is a fake. It's not your award. You're not disabled.
Right.
Right. So it's like you're either disabled or you're not disabled. And those are these binary categories that you either are or you aren't. And there's absolutely no nuance. But we're all temporarily able-bodied or currently disabled.
And that's what's so funny about, like, it's not funny, but the violence is that it's like how you're doing your body affects how I do my body. And so if you're able to fluctuate between these two categories, then my normal body is not as solidly defined. And so that causes that big disruption.
I think it's the same with binary gender, binary able-bodiedness, that if you don't stick to the binary, you're challenging the categories and messing them up, because they are socially constructed categories. They're not. We make them up.
And this is a perfect place to actually introduce our next question, which is about being in between disabled and able-bodied.
There are 4 stages to Gimp boot camp. We have establishing the Gimp civilian divide, imprinting proper Gimp and able-bodied behavior, mastering these behaviors, and of course, our public outreach program. We're going to start with the first, the Gimp civilian divide. This is where we try and wipe out those lazy habits of letting architecture, pain, fatigue, or even spontaneity decide when we use our wheelchair, when we use our crutches, and when we show up walking. So the first thing we use is the science of geography in order to establish where you're going to completely pass as disabled and where you're going to completely pass as able-bodied. I suggest taking out a map of the city, drawing a line down the middle, usually a river is a good place, and decide on the north side of the river, you're always going to pass as able-bodied, and on the south side, you're always going to pass as a Gimp.
I was thinking about like what would inspire this idea of drawing a line down the map, and then the confusion of seeing someone on both sides of the map, and their reactions to seeing you.
Because it really happened to Danielle. That happened to her at a particular restaurant she'd go to on the south side. And one time she was in her wheelchair and she'd always be in her chair. And one time she stood up in the restaurant, and the wait staff just caused a big scene. And so that's where that idea came from. And then it polices Danielle's body. Well, when can I, I need to use my wheelchair for long distances, and then I'm in the restaurant and I'm eating, and the bathroom's inaccessible, so I have to get up and walk to it. And that disrupts people's expectations of what a disabled body is able to do, a person in a wheelchair.
Yeah, and the video really, or the film really makes it clear that like this is really about social expectations and anxieties and what people bring in their own norms and understandings that are about sort of our feelings about what's comfortable. And the film for me is making fun of the idea that able-bodied people would feel comfortable if they're being inspired.
Also, that they'd be comfortable if you just meet their expectations and don't challenge them at all. So the satire in it is that the person who's being seen to have the disability, the wheelchair user, is the one that has to make the able-bodied people feel comfortable, and that there's a whole school for doing this, right? There's a whole boot camp that will teach you how to make able-bodied people more comfortable, so it'll make your life easier.
And it's a bit true to life because so many of our social institutions are set up in ways to normalize and to sort of categorize and standardize so that we do fit expectations of what bodies are supposed to be able to do. And there's no checking in on that person's experience. Like, it's just a projection of the tragedy and there's no acknowledgement of their subjectivity. Actually, this is a good transition to talking about the public outreach program and the reform that Trixie goes through.
Before Gimp Boot Camp's program for recovering inspiration addicts, I felt that I needed tragic Gimps to make me feel able-bodied. Thanks to this program, I no longer need other people's disability to make me feel good about myself and worthwhile. Thanks, Gimp Boot Camp.
I love the reform narrative, like the sad, the slow, inspiring music and the testimonial and the, I've come around to a new way that Trixie has at the end there.
Yeah, she's a recovering inspiration addict, right? So it shows that the program works. It works. It works. It's done its job. Someone would attempt Gimp Boot Camp to be able to teach this to like people who are inspired as well, to able-bodied people who are addicted to inspiration.
And then they won't have embarrassing meltdowns if they're giving out awards.
That's right.
It really keeps Trixie at the center of that narrative. It's very funny. Yeah. Okay, well, let's transition to the next video, which is Elephant in the Room. And I just love the title. So maybe we can start there.
It's a double entendre, right? So it's like what people would first imagine is that the fat person is the elephant in the room, but we're not going to talk about that. But what we're saying in that film is the elephant in the room is the normative policing of people's bodies and the self-policing of people's own bodies to be slender and against fatness.
Let's watch that opening clip about slender trouble.
Right.
I think
Yes.
that'd be a good place to start off.
Do you have slender trouble?
When you see a fat person eating,
Are you reminded of what you've had to sacrifice in order to fit into that tiny box called normal?
Have you accepted self-denial as part of a balanced diet?
Is it possible your slenderness is a phase you'll grow out of?
When we first mention the phrase slender trouble, you're looking right at Lucas. So you think, oh, that person has slender trouble because they're not slender. But as you go further into the film, you realize no, slender trouble is for the people policing their bodies and imperative to be thin, the imperative to not be fat. That's the trouble. That's slender trouble. And we took it, of course, as a phrase that sounds like gender trouble. So you're challenging the binary of gender when you're troubling gender. So here we're troubling slender and challenging again the binary and challenging the policing of bodies around that.
And I think it's important to point out that, like, as Lucas has written in other places, like normative gender is slender. So when we're talking about ideal and normative gender, the body that's expected or desired or socially valued is also slender. And what about the phrase, is it possible it's something you'll grow out of? For me, it was kind of brought up some of the insensitive things that get said to people who are sexually diverse, let's say, like sort of like, oh, that's a phase, or it's not really, you'll come around, or like sort of, but like turning that upside down in the video.
The narrative for the film is based on the heterosexual questionnaire, like, when did you first realize you were gay? And people are always asking that. So the heterosexual questionnaire flips that script and says, when did you first realize you're heterosexual? So this is a play on that as well. So we're trying to flip that script again to get people to realize the ways in which the normative ideology about bodies is used to control everyone, not just fat people, not just disabled people. It controls everybody's bodies because we internalize it. And you have to struggle so hard to get that narrative out of your head. And part of the way that works is we're constantly judging other people. We're looking outside, right? So I really hope that people can that these films help people look more closely at how they're navigating their own lives, how they treat their own bodies, how they judge their own bodies, how they judge other people's bodies, and just like blow it up, blow that narrative up, blow those judgments up, because they are keeping us in a state of control. And like you say, capitalist consumption, the diet industry, all those things that we just think are going to make our lives better, and they don't.
So maybe let's talk then a little bit about the elephant in the room and sort of like in social space.
Why do you skinny people always take up so much room on the bus? Everywhere I look, there you are, taking up the whole bus with your smelly shame cycles. It's an epidemic.
Right, so there it's slenderness that's the epidemic. It's diet culture, it's body shame that's the epidemic. But the normative language is that obesity is an epidemic. Obesity is a disease, right? And even to use that word is such a trigger word as well. The medical system has pathologized fatness and said that it causes diseases. Well, it doesn't. There's no proof that it's causing disease. Sometimes there are things you need to look out for, but it's certainly not a cause of disease.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good research talking about how, the BMI is flawed and is arising out of like actuarial tables from the late, 19th century. And, these creations of ideal body tables was sort of off the cuff and still get used. And, but we might say they are not useful or not predictive, but they become culturally incorporated, and they have momentum in industry, right? Because where are the checks and balances on profiteering off of this stigma? That's sort of the thing that is interesting to me about the idea of the bus, right? Because a lot of what I think fat people experience in terms of social shaming is being in public and taking up space, and whether that's real space or emotional space or whatever it is, and just coming on the bus and needing a little more than a seat. Well, those seats are small, and who decided how much room they're going to be? And so I just really think that this film does a really good job of interrogating socially constructed disgust reactions to what are really bodily variations. Bodies have come in different sizes, in different shapes and different configurations always. Let's talk about this last clip that it's probably my favorite part of the video, and talk about some of the camera movements in the video.
When you go out with your fat friends,
You have fat friends, right?
do you choose places with right tight booths that will bruise their guts? Chairs with arms that will hug their butts?
Spots you enter by too many stairs, with rickety old chairs that you worry would quit. Lickety split if I ate just a bit more shit.
There's two big camera movements in. One is on normal, and the other one is you have fat friends, don't you?
Right, and it's just such a direct, obvious question to the viewer to really make sure they're asking those questions to themselves, I guess, especially the fat friends, do you, and normal, and to show the contempt that we have for normativity. Like just the look on Lucas's face of normal, like that's not appealing.
And I like the idea of flipping that script on, because fat people, in my experience a lot of social exclusion, like not wanting to, people don't want you to be part of their friend group because it makes other people look bad somehow. And this idea that it would be socially unacceptable not to have fat friends is just really funny to me. Like, it's like, what's wrong with you? You don't have, like, you have them, don't you? And sort of that, just really underlining that point.
Yeah, so again, sort of making what's usually considered to be socially not appealing, to make that what's expected of you from us anyway.
Thank you so much for, discussing your films with me. And I know my students, our students will all really benefit from hearing more about what went into them and your decisions. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Kristen. It was fun. Thanks.